Greetings, nerdos, and welcome to the debut episode of 78 episodes, 30 good ones, a Star Trek sandwich based podcast. I am your red shirt level quality host, Oliver Rockside. Thank you so much for joining me today, and hopefully through our 30-part series of looking at Star Trek, the original series, but we're going to be looking at it, hopefully, at least to you, the listener, in a different way. Yes, I am your red shirt level quality host, but good news, kids. Yes, nerdos, we have a guest. And she was the guest on my debut episode of my last podcast. So I thought we'd start a tradition and have her back for the debut edition of this particular podcast. She is the co-host of the Village podcast, which you can find on all of the podcast platforms. She is also the queen of all she surveys in Guelph, Ontario, Canada. She is also my musical nemesis and maybe my Star Trek nemesis, not in the shitty TNG movie way, but we're about to find out whether if she is my Star Trek nemesis. Her name is Candice Lepage. Welcome, Candice. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's true, I am not Tom Hardy, though I would like to have Tom Hardy. Are we that kind of podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Also, I will just note, I prefer to be a geekette rather than a nerdo. Thank you.
Guess what? You're a nerdo for the next 45 minutes. Jesus Christ. We're 4 minutes into this podcast and she's already being objectionable with me.
It's my brand. Come on.
I know. Well, since you are the debut guest, we will refer to you as a geekette if need be as we continue on. But everybody else is nerdos, okay?
Clear.
I'm trying to start a thing here. Candice, you may be wondering why the podcast is titled as it is, but I've already told you why. So I'm just going to tell the rest of the listeners why this podcast is named 78 episodes, 30 good ones. And it was inspired from a book I read, a really, really interesting, great book. I would call it a light read. I would probably refer you to, if you ever get on an airplane again. It's a great airplane book. I guess a light read, Candice, would also be considered a campsite book, road trip book, retreat book. It is by two guys named Edward Gross and Mark A. Altman. And the book, it's in 2 volumes. That's how big it is. It's called The 50-Year Mission, the complete, uncensored, unauthorized oral history of Star Trek. And they've got everybody in there. So they've got everybody dishing the dirt. But it's a fascinating read. And the inspiration for the podcast came when I was reading about Star Trek The Next Generation, and after their disastrous second year, they started hiring writers. And one of the writers that they hired was Ronald D. Moore. That name may be familiar to the nerdos out there in the fact that he not only was the Klingon specialist in The Next Generation, he, of course, and I think should be regarded as his quality work, was one of the 2 minds behind the reimagining of Battlestar Galactica. Anyway, when he came on, when he was offered the job, he decided to rewatch all 70, he called them 79 episodes. We'll get to that in a second. And he rewatched them and he said to someone, 79 episodes, 30 good ones. And I began to think about that line and I thought, you know what, Candice? They're right. That's about right. So that's what we're going to be doing. Is we're going to be counting down the 30 good ones as a protein. And we're going to wrap them all in carbs of the bad ones as we go along.
I feel like carbs are getting a bad rap here.
In this particular case, they will be. In my regular life, they do not. But one of the things that I would love to start with, I should mention just before we go forward, in actuality, there are 79 episodes of Star Trek under canon. But for our purposes, we are going to consider the Menagerie one episode because the Menagerie was made as one episode. So that's why we're going to be 78s. So if I get any nasty letters about, oh, Oliver, it's 79 episodes. No, it's not for our purposes right now. I'm telling you. Okay. I'm being very firm in the first 7 minutes. I don't know why.
That's fine. I'm assuming you are also leaving out the cage entirely, since it's essentially encapsulated in Menagerie.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
But a very good point for you to bring up. Thank you, Candace.
That's
One
why
of
I just
the
got to bring my nerdo cred.
There we are. There we are. Oh, see, we've got Candace using the word already. See, it's a trend. I'm going to be on Instagram soon. The is that Candace? Is that what's considered an influencer?
Not anymore, unfortunately. They've moved.
Okay. um, One of the really interesting things is that I find about Star Trek is that everybody who is a fan seems to have a different origin story of their fandom. Now, I'm not the biggest lover of the word fan because it's short for fanatic, which I think has a connotation that I don't really like. I prefer the term supporters, but for our purposes, we'll use the word fan. And so, for every guest that we have for their first time on the show, because I'm hoping that Candace and all of our other guests that we have lined up in the future will come back for another episode, I'd love to hear, Candace, your Star Trek origin story.
Yes. So I am okay with the word fan. I'm
Mhm.
even okay with the word fanatic,
Okay.
because there are some properties in my life that that have that much of an influence over me, and Star Trek is one of them.
Mhm.
So it's hard to describe my Star Trek origin story, since my grandmother
Mhm.
was a Star Trek fan in
Mhm.
the
Oh, really?
60s. Yeah. And
Okay.
she then raised a family of children who were also Star Trek fans, because
Mhm.
they all watched it together. And so when I was born, 10 years after Star Trek went on the air, occasionally there'd be episodes in syndication on certain things. And just a few years later, the motion picture came out.
Mhm.
So I was essentially watching Star Trek episodes from the womb
Oh,
inside my
wow.
mother,
Okay.
and there are tales told of my family just putting me in my seat, as a newborn, in front of the
Mhm.
TV while they're watching Star Trek. It was just there all the time. It is something that unites my family.
Mhm.
Um, a few years back, I am on a regular show about movies as well. And a few
Mhm.
years ago, we did a Christmas special where we talked about our top 5 sort of Christmas movies. And I was like, well, I'm going to start by naming 6 movies. And it is the entire Star Trek, like, movie,
Because they all came
from.
out they all came out in Christmas. Yeah.
Well, no, because we would spend all Christmas Day
Oh.
watching every movie from 6 o'clock in the morning. The motion picture went on until
Uh,
the end of the night. Every single movie was on Christmas Day in my family, and we spent our families together. We went to my grandparents' home, and all 4 of their kids, so all of my aunts and uncles and my parents, and we all lived together, unhappily but happily, in a little 3-bedroom house
mhm.
for 4 days over Christmas holidays. And so Star Trek was always on Christmas. Never a single Christmas would go by that we wouldn't get Star Trek gifts. Um, one year, my uncle gifted me a membership to the Star Trek fan club. I think I was probably about 11 or 12 at that time, and I maintained that membership for quite a few years. And part of that membership, they sent us these like info cards, because TNG started in '87, so it was
Right.
about then when I became a member of the fan club. And so these
Mhm.
info cards would come out about the episodes and the people in the episodes, and I had those until very recently. I only have a couple of them left, and it's
Mhm.
because I've had them signed by cast members.
Mhm.
So starting in the early 2000s, I found out that science fiction conventions actually happened in Canada. I had no
Yes?
idea.
No?
Because I didn't know. It was not a thing that we went to. I had no idea that these things happened. One day in the TV guide, I saw a little ad for Toronto Trek, which was a
Mhm.
Star Trek convention, which really grew into a whole sort of sci-fi cult kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, I saw a little ad for Toronto Trek. I will be honest that the reason I went was actually because there was a cast member of Buffy the Vampire Slayer who was going to be there, and I was just like, "What? I can go! I can go! This is insane!" And so I did, all by myself on a Friday night. I drove myself to the hotel in Toronto. Didn't know a single person who was going to be there. Didn't
Mhm.
ask anybody to come with me because I was like, I don't know who's going to come with me. I'm just going to go. And I drove up to this hotel and there were Klingons everywhere. And I was just
Mhm.
like, oh my God, where has this been my whole life? What? I didn't know that this happened. There are Klingons here. Oh my gosh. And the Klingons were working the security.
Yeah.
And it was mind blowing. And my life changed dramatically at that point. I have since met, at the time, sadly, Bones had already passed away.
Mhm.
DeForest Kelly had already passed away, which is very upsetting because he's my favorite character in the
Okay.
shows.
Okay.
Um, so I never got a chance to meet him, but I have met pretty much every single other one of the original series cast.
Mhm.
Leonard Nimoy, William Shatner, Walter Koenig, who is just the kindest man. He
Mhm.
cares about everybody. He's the star and he's asking everyone, like, are you okay? Can I get you some water? Can I do
Right.
this for you? Can I do that for you? George Takei, I've met a few
Mhm.
times. Incredible person. And Nichelle Nichols as Uhura, just gorgeous in
Mhm.
real life. And Jimmy Doohan, just a very quick, I didn't get much of an opportunity to meet him. It was just sort of like a drive by. He was already in a wheelchair at that point in time when we
Right.
were at the same convention. But yeah, so yeah, there you go. On top of that, I will also say, still to this day, Star Trek unites us as a family. My uncle sent me a photo of his Christmas tree this year, which is just decked out. I mean, it's every year they get more and more Star Trek things. Hallmark makes this whole line of licensed
Mhm.
Star Trek ornaments, and this
Mhm.
year they put out the entire crew, like the deck officer crew,
Right.
and a topper of the Enterprise, and they all talk to each other, and they can act out an entire episode.
Oh
And
god.
he got that, and it was so expensive, and I was just like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. And he sent me a photo and said, I did it, and here they are on the tree. I'm like, oh my god. And then he recorded a video for me, but because Omicron happened, we did not get to spend time together over Christmas, so I didn't get to see that, but
No.
I shall.
Right. Well, I think you're the first person I've ever known who's been a Star Trek fan in utero. Um, so that's a first. So basically, the overarching theme is that it kind of brought your family together and kind of made a glue that always stuck.
Yes, yeah, and
Yeah.
it's the thing that we can always turn back to if things start to get a little, uncomfortable.
Right.
It's like, you know what? Let's just put out the Wrath of Khan on. It'll be fine.
Oh yeah. It's
Everyone
a
will come
family
together
build.
again.
It's a family builder, people.
Yeah.
Uh, that's really interesting. But since Candace has shared hers, I will share mine, and mine actually comes from my mother. My parents, uh, my father used to call the television the idiot box, and my mother used to refer to the television and me as a cultural desert. So TV was frowned upon in my family when I was growing up. Lots of radio.
Mhm.
Um, so many Saturday afternoons I had to listen to the opera from the Met. Oh my God. Um, so I was only allowed to watch two television shows until I got to be about 12. So from 0 to 6, I was allowed to watch Sesame Street for obvious reasons. It kind of helped me along. Um, but from 6 to 12, my mother made a decision that made me a Star Trek fan. Is that my mother made the realization that I was going to grow up in a very monochromatic society. I was raised in the country, in a town of population 250 of all white people. My high school had 800 people. We had 6 people of color in my high school. So my mother felt that I should learn that people who don't look like me are equals, and that the whole content of your character routine was important. And so my mother thought Star Trek was a great lesson in this because, of course, in Star Trek, just within the human population, there is diversity, uh, which I was not going to be exposed to during my formative years. And then, of course, the aliens, who in Star Trek are treated equally to begin with, depending on whether they do a good thing or a bad thing, differently afterwards, but as equals. And my mother thought that was a very, very good lesson for me to learn. So that was the starting point of it, was that the only thing I was allowed to watch was Star Trek. So that kind of imprinted upon me. The other thing is, and I think Candace, you can appreciate this because although Candace didn't grow up in the country, she certainly was exposed to a lot of Northern Ontario growing up.
Mhm.
Is my parents thought I was bonkers because when in my teenagerhood I would lie outside in the summer on a lawn chair and just look up at the stars because when you live in the country in Canada, you can do that because
Yes.
as you know, Candace, it lights the sky.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I remember looking at those stars and thinking, "Wow, there may be people like me on around on a body circling that particular star who's doing the same thing that I'm doing." And that sense of wonder of space that Star Trek gave me still remains with me today to this day. I now live about 2,000 miles or about 3,000 kilometers south of where Candace is. And so my stars are different. And I always look up in the sky here and look up and go, the stars are wrong. But I still have a sense of wonder about it. And I think everybody's Star Trek origin story is different. And I just find them very interesting because yours was a family bonding,
Hmm.
whereas my experience was about teaching that there are others who don't look like me and to treat them just as nicely or recognize them equally as you would from what you've been raised around.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's funny, your story, it does make me wonder, because I never did ask, what made my grandmother such a fan of science fiction, and not
mhm.
just science fiction, like, she was also, even into her 60s, 70s, 80s, she was watching the superhero TV shows,
Mhm.
all the different space shows, like, that was just it was her favorite genre, and I honestly don't really know why that is.
Really?
Mhm.
Well, I mean, you have to remember that, these kind of superhero things are not new to us. I mean, they were part of the cinema in the 30s, with Flash Gordon and the birth of Superman and all those kind of stuff. So this kind of fantasy world has been around for a long, long time within popular media. So I just wonder if she was like, she would go to the cinema on Saturday afternoons and watch the newsreel in a double feature with a Flash Gordon serial put in the middle somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, she was born in 1936. She was a young grandmother.
Hmm.
So, in the 60s, she was still just
Right.
fairly young watching Star
Yeah.
Trek.
So that's the origin stories of Candace and myself. I won't repeat mine, but for every guest that comes on, I'll be asking them their origin stories. So if you enjoy that kind of background on our guests, please let me know, and we certainly will continue it on. But now we must get to Star Trek proper, and because this is the debut episode, I think it's important, and because Candace is here as well, I think it's important that we have to cover two things because I'm sure everybody who's listening to this has watched Star Trek before. But if you go back If you've watched it before, then you go back. You haven't watched an episode in 10 or 20 years or whatever, and you go back. I should let you know that all of the episodes are on Netflix everywhere except the United States, which
Hmm.
they are on the Paramount Network in the United States. Um, but when you go back 55 years, things get a little cringy. And we have to talk about these things to begin with because I think they're very important, especially within the world we live in now, where eyes are being opened and we have to kind of talk about it. Uh, the first thing is Gene Roddenberry really, after his death, all the stories started coming out, and he wasn't a really nice man. Basically, is what came out of it. But the overarching thing in this series is, I think, one thing we have to give him kudos for, and then one we have to tear him to shreds for. Um, but I think the one thing that we have to give him kudos for is representation in Star Trek. And again, we are looking at this through a 55-year-old lens. Uh, yes, we had a guy from Mexico playing a South Asian. But that wasn't a thing back in the 60s. I don't think that was, I mean, it should have been on the horizon, but I don't think anybody was even thinking about that. But his use and validation with people of color, I think, should be lauded, especially in that particular time. Do you feel the same way, Candace?
Yeah, absolutely. So both Nichelle Nichols and George Takei, um, were given prominent roles really in this show, and there's certainly arguments about you know Nichelle Nichols' outfits and what she did, and her character, stories and what she was able to do, but um, yeah, you're right. We are talking about a long time ago, and um, just the fact that a major like primetime TV show had two people of color in the main cast
Hmm.
was a very big deal. And then
Hmm.
he does, he continued to weave that through his stories as well. Incredibly clunky, like um, they were going through the civil rights movement at the time,
Hmm.
um, and so some sometimes the themes were very, very like just hammered over your head until it's like, I
Yes.
get it. I get it.
Yeah.
He's white
Yeah.
on one side and black on the other, and you're
Yeah.
black on one side and white on the
Yeah.
other. We're not the same. Um, but for whatever reason, those that was important to him, or he at least felt that it was important enough to be talked about, to be
Hmm.
addressed.
Hmm.
So I do think that it's very important. And I mean, George Takei, Nichelle Nichols has as well. Like she took that forward. And of course, most people know the story about her saying she wanted to quit, and then having met Dr. Martin Luther King, who convinced her that she should not, and that her mere presence there was enough.
Hmm.
It's enough at this point in time. We've got to start somewhere, and that is enough. George
Hmm.
Takei has continued to use his platform to push and push and push, for so much representation, and it's really great to see.
Well, the other thing is that Roddenberry not only instilled this kind of tolerance, I guess I could put it in 60s terms, or representation would be a better word, not only in his regular cast, but also in some of the characters that came along. I remember the episode The Changeling, where Professor Richard Daystrom is a man of color,
Mhm.
in an official, really, really high position. So he would kind of mix things in that way. So it wasn't just lip service. The shocking thing about this is that you have to remember that Gene Roddenberry, before he became a writer, was in the LAPD, not exactly known for the reservoir of sensitivity. So this was kind of earth shattering for the '60s. And yes, it's a bit cringy, but if you go back 10 years and watch 30 Rocks now, that's only 10 years ago. Some of the stuff
Yeah.
on 30 Rock is pretty cringy in today's world. So, you know, it's relative.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now we must discuss the hoarder in the room, and or the Mugatu in the room. Take your pick. And that is Gene Roddenberry's terrible, like Harvey Weinstein level representation of women. And this has no excuses. I don't care what decade this was. His treatment of women is deplorable. And what I mean by that is in his private life and his wife, his behavior was deplorable. But the representation of women in Star Trek is deplorable, from their costumes to their roles. And we have to talk about it, Candace. And I'm so glad you're here because you identify as a woman, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But it's shockingly bad in my mind.
I don't disagree with you, and absolutely through 21st century eyes, absolutely. Galaxy Quest made a whole character joking about this. Um,
Yes.
but at the same time, I will say that
An underrated movie, by the way, just as a
yes,
little tip. Sorry.
yeah. Uh, as a young girl watching this
Hmm.
show, I didn't see that. Um, and I will also say that as a young girl and still as a 40 something year old girl, um, fuck, I love the costumes in the original series. Those mini skirts and the high boots are exactly what I wish all women wore all the time. I love that look.
But
Not very useful.
right. Yeah,
There is
it's very eye candy-ish, isn't it?
it's
Maybe
just
that's
it's
what I'm kind of getting at.
yeah, I mean, it's certainly yeah. Though I will say, the women were absolutely wearing Spanx underneath as part of the uniform, not like the actresses were, so that they wouldn't show booty. The booty
Right.
shorts were part of the uniform as well, that they were
Hmm.
built into the uniform.
Right.
But yeah, it's definitely. I mean, now what? Like I did a rewatch of the entire series. I've
Mm-hmm.
the entire all of the series is. I've stopped at Enterprise, which took forever, and I will get into Discovery soon. But I started rewatching them all with the original series, and as I was rewatching them, there were many times that I was just like, okay, um, Kirk just sleeps with anything,
Hmm.
uh, and the women just fall for him, which is definitely a problem because I'm like, these are like we're introduced to these women, as women in powerful roles sometimes, and yet they're just falling for this. What is going on here? Um, there was one particular episode which is great, like Romulan High Command. There was
Hmm.
a woman, and I was like,
Hmm.
you know, I still have to say, like, I don't know if it's Roddenberry, much like Professor Marsden, if it's sort of a fetish of
Hmm.
like women in power who also want to have sex with me and are sexy, but
Hmm.
he did do that. Like he put them in power and then also made them sexy. And as a woman, I kind of feel like, yeah, I can be in power and be sexy too. That's
Hmm.
that's okay.
Hmm.
So you know, it's hard for me to yeah, either validate or invalidate this sort of sexism because it's complicated.
Well, it is complicated, and it's very interesting that you put forward that opinion. You did mention Enterprise, and I always found it very strange that in this particular topic, Star Trek made a full circle, because if you watch the original Star Trek,
Enterprise is
that
awful.
is
Awful. I have
awful.
never
It's like
seen anything as sexist and disgusting in my life as Enterprise. I don't understand people who hold that show up as a good show. I'm like, I it
the
is
representate the
uncomfortable.
represent well, let's be honest, it's the representation of one woman in Enterprise, and it's just like this full circle, like they've gone right back to the 60s with their representation of T'Pol. I mean, it's just if they the thing about Enterprise, I will say that I enjoyed the third season, which was the Zindi storyline. because they were actually doing something. But through all 4 seasons of Enterprise, it was like any way they could get her into the decontamination suite, you
Yes,
know.
where she had to shower and rub herself down with sparkles.
Yes,
It was
yes.
what?
It's like, oh my god, yeah,
Yeah,
stripper dust.
yeah.
Yeah,
I will
I'm
say
sorry. I'm
it
sorry, sex worker dust. I'm
yeah.
sorry.
It wasn't only her character. Like, not only was her character completely sexualized, um, I can't remember the
Well,
name.
Linda
Yeah,
Park
Linda
was
Park, who is
in the
a
crossover episode. They made her that. Yeah.
yeah. So she is beautiful. And I actually have a friend who is a gay man who says that the only woman he would ever, you know, turn straight for
Mhm.
is Linda Park in leather with a motorcycle, which is an actual photo that she has of herself. Um, that you can buy
Okay.
at sci-fi conventions.
On
But
that note,
Linda Park is beautiful, but they also made her character so weak and
mousy.
ineffective, and it
Yeah.
was terrible. I was like, okay, so we have like cold, logical, and sexy, or
Hmm.
like, yeah, weak and ineffective, like worse than the girl next door. But not only
Hmm.
that, they also introduced all the sexuality to all of the other characters too. Like, so many of the storylines
Yeah.
revolved around whether or not people would have sex with each other. Like, there was a
Hmm.
whole weird storyline about this, like, kind of a sex bot slave.
Hmm.
Like, it
And
was
don't
gross.
forget don't forget a man getting pregnant. What
Yeah.
was? Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, what we'll conclude on is I can only imagine the rolls of double sided tape that went into the budget at Star Trek just to keep those outfits that some of those women had to wear on. One only
Hmm.
wonders.
Hmm.
Uh, shall we carb load, Candace?
Yes, let's.
Okay, so we begin our sandwich. We're going to carb load, people, and we're going to start with our first carb. Now, as we begin this series, I'm not going to do episodes that are great or horrific. We're going to do above average, below average. So if anybody's a fan of the carbs we're doing today, no offense. I just think they're below average. We don't know whether Candace thinks they're below average yet. I just do. And we start off with a second season episode, and it's basically your grade 9 biology class. It is called the immunity syndrome, and it is a tough slog. Candace, my God. This is about an amoeba in space. Please, we're done.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you're in space and you can only have the Klingons on so many times, and you can only like, talk about racism and sexism and the futility of war so many times. So you gotta fill time. I mean, let's remember, these seasons, they were doing 26 episodes in a season.
Yeah, I know,
That's
but
ugh.
it's what they filled the time with in this particular episode. Basically,
Yeah.
what happens is that uh, this giant amoeba decides to destroy a ship filled with 400 Vulcans. So all of a sudden, Spock has a psychic thing, and this is foreshadowing for In Search of. I can tell you that psychics in space. Um, and so they come across this amoeba, and the amoeba is a negative energy, and they have to figure out how to destroy the amoeba. But it's how they fill the time, because they keep on concentrating on the fact that they've only got an hour and a half to live until this amoeba eats them or whatever. And they spend 7 minutes on this really nasty relationship between McCoy and Spock. I mean, we're in the second season. They should have fleshed this out. That their relationship is based on snark and respect and grudging respect. That's it. There's no meanness. But didn't you find this 7 minutes of them going back and forth on who's better to do the mission? Didn't you find it a little nasty?
Yeah, I will say, so the Bones and Spock relationship is actually my very favorite thing about
Mm.
Star Trek.
As
And
same here.
yeah, and so I loved that they sort of set this up, but then it was yeah, it wasn't executed as well as it has been in
It's
other
just McCoy.
episodes.
It's just McCoy being a dick.
Yeah, I mean, I did like sort of right here. I was like, since when does Bones have a martyr complex? Which
Yeah.
technically, like, that's actually the line that Spock tells him, like, "Oh, you have a martyr complex." And I was like, when have we ever thought of Bones as a martyr complex? The guy won't even take a transporter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, this is really no. I mean, I guess he's giddy because he's a doctor and a scientist, and he has an opportunity to learn about a new species.
Well, when they're doing all of this, I'm just going, send Chekhov. He's already been shown to be the second in command on the science station. He sits at the helm. Send him. He's expendable. It's like the other thing about Bones in this particular episode is he's running around like injecting
Stimulants!
people.
Give them all stimulants!
I
I
know.
loved that.
It's like, what are we? Are we at like an after show party at Freddie Mercury's house in 1979? Is like Nurse Chapel cutting up lines of coke in the back room for everybody? He's running around sticking people with drugs left, right, and center. It's like,
Yes,
oh
yes.
god.
Yeah, and, like, of all the people, Kirk is the one that he's concerned about, like, "Oh, you're gonna start getting, sick from these stimulants." I'm like, "Well, but so stop giving them to everybody, like,
Yeah,
what are
I
you
know.
doing?" Yeah.
If they've only got an hour and a half to live, I think he ejected everybody about like 30 times.
Yeah,
It
like,
was like
every 13 minutes
bananas.
or something. Yeah, I'll say too with this, I thought that I don't remember who wrote it. It was not a name that I recognized. Oh,
Mhm.
Robert Sabaroff. But um, I really had to sort of ask at one point. I was like, "What are we doing here? Why are we
Thank you.
saying things like this? When do you expect to reach penetration?" They ask
Oh,
Spock,
oh my God.
and then
This
Spock
whole pet.
replies saying, "There, take caution. The area of penetration will be quite sensitive." I was like, "Why? Why are you phrasing it this way? Phrasing? Hello, where's Archer when you need him?"
All during that whole penetration thing, I was thinking of classic Jason just making a meal out of that whole bit about the penetration thing. I think, oh, I could just think about Jason's jokes during all
Like,
of this.
there is absolutely no way that they weren't giggling in the writers' room when writing this. So I'm like, why? What? Like, who okayed this? This is
I
the
know.
second season. Like, this is the
Rod
best season of the show.
Roddenberry.
Ugh, true.
Oh, actually, we should just to go back, not to interrupt the episode chat, but just to go back about Roddenberry's misogyny. Just to keep this in mind, kids, his boss was Lucille Ball. Just keep that in
Yeah.
mind. Um, yeah, the stimulants was fun. The other thing that I found messy about the writing is that they keep on going back from miles to kilometers,
Oh, I
and I'm
didn't
like,
notice that.
did anybody check that?
I did
I
laugh
don't
about
know.
the okay, now back out nice and straight. Don't waste any time. I'm like, you're in space. Every line is straight. Like,
Hmm.
what are you talking about?
Yeah, I know. Oh, that believe me, 3 dimensions was a problem. We're going to get to that. Not in this episode, but we are going to get to it soon enough. Um, yeah, the writing was very messy. The other thing is, I still have to discover the secret of the wraparound because Shatner's wearing his wraparound green outfit here, and I don't know
Yeah.
where that came from
Yeah, I was shocked
because
to
it
see
comes and
that.
it goes. Yeah.
It's also weird because the insignia, which
Hmm.
is typically on the sort of left like
Yeah,
breast
on the left
area,
breast. Yeah,
it's actually just over his hip on the left
I
side.
know.
And I was like,
I
why?
know.
Like, there's
It's
there's
very
plenty of material there to still put it over your left breast. It's not like a
no.
that deep a V-neck that it's also kind of a scoop. Like,
Yeah. No, it's very jaunty.
yeah,
I,
even the
I, I thought
color of it is really off.
yeah, I thought it was a style choice, but it's going to come in our next carb as well. But it just the wraparound seems to come and go.
Yeah.
Uh,
I did note, though, also what I did love about his uniform when he was sitting in his chair when they were doing their excellent acting as they were, being flung about.
Right.
When we came back, I was like, oh, he's wearing floods and like high boots.
Yeah.
Like the pants are like cargos. They're cargo
Yeah.
pants. They
I
stop, or not
know.
cargos, but they capris. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes. Yes. Yes, it's a solid fashion choice, and it's in fact, and we're going to be talking about fashion choices later in this particular episode. But yes, that's a good catch there, Candace. So immunity syndrome, uh,
It
it's
wasn't the
below.
worst.
No, it's certainly not the worst, but it's below average. And now we get to our other carb. It's wrapping around the other side of our sandwich, and
Hmm.
this is another second season episode. It is called the Doomsday Machine, and I think it should have been called Blunts in Space. This must have been an in joke because this basically is a joint in space. How do you know I know it's a joint in space? I could have called it a cannoli in space, for instance, but no, it's a joint in space because it has the munchies and it is nomming planets left, right, and center. And this has a guest star, Candace.
Hmm.
Oh boy. The guest star is William Wyndham, and for those, and I know somebody who's listening who is a Murder She Wrote fan. If you don't know the name William Wyndham, he is Dr. Seth on Murder She Wrote. In fact, this person and I have a secret suspicion that Dr. Seth is a serial killer in secret. This is why there are more murders in Maine on Murder She Wrote than a Saturday night in Detroit for some reason. But speaking of eating, William Wyndham chews so much scenery in this episode.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
your thoughts on the Doomsday Machine, Candace?
Um. So I actually, I enjoy this episode.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah. I always. I mean, I will also preface this by saying this was perhaps not the right weekend of the pandemic for me to watch an episode where a person says, I don't recognize your authority to relieve me of duty.
Yes, yes.
Um,
Perhaps this is a bad weekend. Yes.
yeah, yeah. Uh, Certainly there were um, yeah, there were some things that were a little too much true to life this weekend
Yes.
with this. But I mean, I don't like Decker as a character. Clearly, uh, I think he described himself very well when he said, "I don't
Mhm.
recognize your authority to relieve me of duty."
Right.
Um, but uh, it is one of the things that I love about Star Trek is that they continue to go back. This is a series that has a canon that continues on and carries on, and so the
Mhm.
the family name Decker comes
Yes.
back a
Yes.
number of times, and so it's always nice to go back and remember, and then to see, oh yeah, that's right.
Would you like to tell people why the Decker name is important, especially in Star Trek: The Motion Picture?
Yes, well, sadly, the actor who played Decker
Ugh.
in Star Trek: The Motion Picture is
Ugh.
verboten. He's not to be.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
He said time out.
Yes, yes. However, his character is one of the more interesting things about motion picture. I actually really like the motion picture, but so he's is he William Decker, right?
Yes.
He
Yes.
is the captain of the sort of new Enterprise as they
Hmm.
go off and are interrupted. Are find the V'ger uh,
Hmm.
uh, signal, and yeah, he has to go through a whole sort of life cycle and all these decisions, and it's interesting to sort of go back and see him, and then come back to his father, who is
Hmm.
this Decker, Matt Decker, and how he did die versus what the official record probably says.
Hmm.
Um, and then you wonder, one, how does a young person live with that, grow up with their father
Hmm.
having died in the line of duty. What does that make a person have to, think about how they're going to be of duty and service? And in some ways, William Decker, kind of um, does a much more honorable version of what his dad did.
Hmm. Yes. The episode, just for people, just if they've saw it a long time ago and need reminding, it's basically about another piece of space junk. It's like the amoeba, that is apparently a robot weapon from another galaxy that just goes around eating planets so it can keep on living. Um, Again, it's a tried and true Star Trek kind of motif all the way in. It's just, again, and Candace, you're going to have to help me here because of your knowledge of literature. Um, what can we please retire the Moby Dick thing? Can we please? It's so overdone. I mean, this is 55 years ago. They're still doing it today. Can we just retire it, please?
I don't know that you can. I mean, people feel like it's a classic for a reason, and people get into certain uh, careers and jobs because they see themselves as a certain thing. So
Hmm. Well, we should tell listeners that there's another episode of Star Trek that does the same Moby Dick thing, and it is so much worse than this one. So we're going to be talking about Moby Dick again.
yeah,
I just find it a very cloying motif to use. It drives me crazy.
yeah. See, and for me, I did not. I mean, I definitely see what you're saying about the Moby Dick thing, but to me, this was while I enjoyed it. It is one of the ones, and maybe this is why I did like it, because I do like the uh I'm okay with going back to the 60s, and I'm okay with the messages that are like hammered over our heads. I kind of
Hmm.
like them. And this is such an enormous anti-nuclear power,
Oh,
anti-nuclear
yes.
weapon
Yeah.
um episode. Like, it's like right from the beginning called the Doomsday Machine. Essentially, this is a weapon of mass destruction that
Hmm.
is supposed to, this is about the Cold War. This is supposed to be like, two sides create these weapons, and now you have this mutually assured destruction. And this is what's happened, right? Except that one of these things has continued on, and now they actually use a nuclear bomb essentially to blow it up. I mean,
Hmm.
it's like hammered over the head, right to the point where they actually talk about Hiroshima in the end.
Yes. Yeah, they talk about the H bomb, which never
Yeah,
came to fruition. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, but again, it's a stoner weapon. I mean, it's going to eat
It does
planets
look like a
after.
blunt.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it does. It's like it eats Kraft dinner from Big Green Bowl at 3 a.m. Every night after it goes to the bed. I don't know.
Yeah, I
It just
will
has that
say,
vibe.
so on Netflix, and presumably on Paramount as well, they are airing the touched up versions of the
Yes,
episodes. So
they
with
look
the
spectacular.
they
Yeah.
do. I was really impressed with the work that they
Mhm.
did on touching up the special effects without making it look like it's not made in the 60s.
Yes. Yeah.
I will, however, say the so in the previous episode, the immunity syndrome, when Spock returns back to the ship on the shuttle,
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
I was like, okay, no, you took the touch up a little too far for that
Mhm.
scene as he was coming back in. I didn't like it.
Right.
I was like, nope, you've taken me actually out of it. This,
Right.
however, seeing the Doomsday Machine and seeing them as they're, crossing it and doing the phaser fire, I was like, this
Mhm.
looks great. Like, it's touched up to exactly the right amount that it pops off the screen and looks like it really is a flying joint.
Mhm.
But it doesn't it they didn't touch it up so much that now I'm like, well, clearly this is 21st century special effects in
Mhm.
a 20th century TV show.
Yeah. We should also mention something else which I found jarring is that in the immunity syndrome, there's no Sulu. And in the Doomsday Machine, there's no Chekhov and there's no Uhura. They've got some Karen on communications. She's got the little thing stuck in her ear, and I'm dying to see if she asks for the manager. she's unexplained. I think they gave her the name
Yeah.
Lieutenant Palmer.
Could be. Yep.
Yeah, where's Uhura?
Well, people need days off sometimes.
No, I think Gene Roddenberry was doing a favor, if you know what I mean. Yeah, but no Uhura and no Chekhov in this particular episode. The other
Yeah.
thing we're going to be other thing we're going to be tracking through this whole series is William Shatner's lids because
Mm.
his toupee game in the '60s. Now, I would say both of these episodes were tier 3. Okay, like I mean, if you want to go tier 5, Shatner, or as I like to call it, the Shatner 3000, peak Shatner lid is T.J. Hooker. That
Yeah.
is an incredible lid. But so we're going to keep track of Shatner's toupee stylings because they do vary from episode to episode, and also we're going to throw in some Walter Koenig toupee
Oh,
games as well as we go
yeah.
along, just for a little
Yeah.
bit of a spice. But shall we get
Um,
to the protein, Candace?
just before we do that, I want one note on the Doomsday Machine. And again, this is part of the whole like hitting you over the head, but I guess maybe like that just works for me because Kirk had the line to Decker as Decker is doing this ridiculous like um, you know, suicide run. Kirk
Mm-hmm.
says, "We're stronger with you than without you."
Mm-hmm.
Which is like it's a cheesy line, but also it's also a perfect line. Like it's so true, and in a way, it is a lot of what the whole show is about. And so I just want to say
Mm-hmm.
kudos to whoever like actually put that in there
Right.
because um, it's a good line.
Oh,
It
okay.
fits. It fits Star Trek as far as I'm concerned.
Well done.
But it could also
Okay.
be the fact that this is the wrong weekend to watch this
Yeah.
episode.
So let's talk protein, shall we? The best part of the sandwich. And in this particular episode, episode of the podcast, our protein du jour, and I'm going to start this series with a hot take here, Candace.
Hmm.
Now, is it Scott Bonnet hot? No, but it's not lukewarm either. I'm going to call it jacuzzi hot. Uh, but if you do a rewatch, and Candace has just admitted that she did do a rewatch, and I've done one, you'll realize that season 2 is not as good as you remember, and season 3 is better than you remember. We think of season 3 as being awful because when there are stinkers, they are stinkers.
Hmm.
But our protein for the for today is a third season episode, and it actually is the second to last episode that was ever broadcast of the original series. Today's protein is all our yesterdays. And is this a great episode? No. It's a fun episode, and it's fun because they actually do time travel right. Star Trek has a problem with time travel stories. I know that everybody loves a good time travel story, but more times than not, and I'm not saying there hasn't been some good time travel episodes, but more times than not, Star Trek butchers it by making it just so illogical. And it takes, at least it takes me out of it. And it's led to this whole Kelvin timeline abortion. Don't fuck around with timelines, please. But this, I think, was a great way to do it because there's none of this what happens in the past affects the future garbage. This is about a planet that's about to go, that's whose sun is about to go supernova. And their ingenious idea of saving everyone is to not figure out how to stop the nova, but to build a machine that sends everybody back in time so they can live out their natural lives instead of getting, burnt to a crisp by a nova. So Spock, McCoy, and the Enterprise thinks that there's still people on this planet, so they go down to warn them only 3.5 hours before the Nova goes. Thanks, guys.
Just enough time to evacuate the
Yeah,
entire
yeah,
planet.
yeah. So they beam down. There's no one around except for Mr. Atoz, who is in charge of a library. Now, talk about bang you over the head, Candace. Mr. Atoz, A to Z, or Z for civilized people.
Mhm.
Really, Star Trek? I'm sorry, that was a bit obvious. However, redemption is at hand because Mr. Atoz is played by Ian Wolfe, who is a fantastic character actor, and who also, I don't know if he's still with us. I'm sure he isn't, but he seems the same age no matter when he does a part. Some of our younger listeners may remember him as Hirsch, who was Mrs. Carlson's butler on WKRP.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah. But Ian Wolfe is the librarian, and Kirk gets sent. We're going to have to talk about this, Candace, because I don't know
Mhm.
where the fuck he got sent based
I
on
don't
the
know.
costumes and the accents. But Spock and McCoy get sent to this particular planet's ice age, and guess who's waiting for them? Is Mariette Hartley in? It's a bikini, but the bottoms. I think Candace, you're going to agree that the bottoms are a skirt. I think, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah, she's kind of
Okay.
wearing like a bit of a loinclothy sort of.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, it's not. It's not culottes. It's more of a skirt, I think.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, Now that's the good part of the episode because it. I love the idea of it, and I do enjoy the Spock Bones part. With one objection, the Kirk part is just.
Oh my god, it's awful.
Please, okay. Um, everybody's dressed like a musketeer, so at first blush you think you're in 19th century France. And then everybody starts talking with an Irish accent, and you're thinking, "Are we in Dublin now?" I don't know what's going on. Candace, can you explain it to me?
So here's the thing. It's not Earth, it's some other planet, and it's
Yeah,
their past.
that's true. That's
It's
true.
just,
Okay.
some
Okay.
past where they still believe in spirits and witchcraft and stuff
Hmm.
like that.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, yeah. The so this to me was the worst episode of the three.
Oh, really?
And not because it was offensive in any way, but because it
Hmm.
was so forgettable. I will be honest, when I put this on this week, it started
Hmm.
playing and I was like, I have no memory of ever having seen this episode ever at any time.
Really?
Ever. Yeah. And as I watched it, I have almost no notes. Like I was so disinterested in the entire thing.
Ah, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
See, I think it's one of the bright lights of the third season, and it
Well,
really has to.
I don't think the third season is that good, so I would.
No, no, I think it's better than there's some good episodes in the third season. I'm going to stand by that.
Yeah.
Um, but I I liked anytime Spock and McCoy are doing something, on their own. I'm
Mhm.
in, right.
Yeah, and so I totally agree, and that's the thing. So I my note here is that this committed the most egregious sin of all Star Trek, which is that it was boring.
Oh, see, I
And
think I think I think the two carves we've done were way more boring than this.
yeah, see, I found the Doomsday Machine to at least be like kind of exciting and on the edge, whereas this
Hmm.
I felt like had almost no stakes. And on top of that, so I Bones and Spock, I agree with you, right? Like just love the two of
Hmm.
them together. So I was like, okay, great. The two of them are going to be stuck on a planet together. They're going to have to figure this out. Oh, we're not going to do anything because Bones is asleep for half the time, and
Hmm.
then you know, Spock starts losing his control, which is also so. This is some real talk here. Um, I ident until the Bajorans came around, and
Hmm.
and still sort of now. I essentially identify as a Vulcan.
Hmm.
I am just like I had so many emotions as a child, out of control, uncomfortable, especially anger, and I really had to deal with that. And so to me, the whole Vulcan, everything about Vulcans is very like I'm really into that storyline. And I
Hmm.
one of my proudest things is that people, including therapists, use the word pragmatic to describe me, which to me is the Vulcan. Like I can compartmentalize,
Hmm.
I can appreciate my emotion, I can understand it, I can give it a name, and I can say right now is not the moment to deal with that. So I'm going to do
Hmm.
whatever I have to do, and then I'll deal with that at some other time. And so all of my life, the Vulcan has been like my mindset. And
Hmm.
so when Spock loses those things, I love those storylines. And nothing, it was hardly anything happened with him losing it. Like Leonard Nimoy is this incredible, like, subtle actor who can also be super over the top. And I was just
Hmm.
like, where I want more.
Well, I mean, I think that from a logic point of view, I know that sounds funny for me to use it. That didn't make sense, but I will argue with you. First of all, Spock goes keto. That's a first.
Yeah.
And there it's certainly alluded to that there's been cave boinking. I mean, we've been down this path with Spock before, but even still, very unSpockian. But the fact that on a planet that isn't his, that he's going back to being a 5,000 years as a Vulcan just because he came through a portal into a world he does not know yet and has not aged because he's only been
Yeah.
there for a few hours. That didn't make sense. But I think what I love about the episode, I love the idea of the episode.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
the stuff with Kirk was very ham-handed in how it was presented. But I think it's the idea of it, and I think that it did time travel while avoiding the usual Star Trek traps that it seems to put himself in. I'll give you an example of this. A lot of TNG fans regard yesterday's Enterprise as the best episode that they ever did. It's a
Hmm.
mess, people, and you can tell because 6 people wrote it. That screams, we don't know what we're doing. Everybody loved the idea of being a dark enterprise, right? But the episode does not make any sense whatsoever. Not anything. And now with the new stuff, and if you haven't seen Discovery, spoiler alert, it's
Hmm.
awful, Candace. Um, um, uh, the whole Kelvin timeline it's fucked up everything we've ever known about Star Trek, and it's done it on purpose so to make it easier for the writers that they don't have to follow canon. So I hate it when Star Trek does. They don't do it well. I'm sorry, but this particular instance, I think they did very, very well. I love
Hmm.
I love the idea.
Yeah. And
Not a great episode, but a good one, I think.
well, I will say that the logic of Spock sort of losing control actually did make sense to me because
Okay.
the excuse me, the prosecutor on Kirk's past
Hmm.
said like, oh, have you not been prepped yet?
Hmm.
So they all go through this transformation so that they can live in the past. And he says like
Hmm.
he's going to start forgetting who he is and
Right.
actually just
Right.
become a member of the past. They have to actually go through this sort of thing. So in a way, that's what's happening to Spock is that
Hmm.
he's forgetting all of what he like who he is, and he's just becoming what his innate nature is because
Hmm.
Vulcans are incredibly emotional and incredibly passionate,
Yes.
and they control it, they compartmentalize it, but
Hmm.
they are so emotional. They're like, and this is why then the Bajorans, when the Bajorans came, I was like, oh my
Hmm.
goodness, this is an even better race for me to like log onto
Right.
because they are equally like passionate
Hmm.
and fiery, and they're able to actually channel all of that emotion into action and into doing things as opposed to having to sort of shut down everything. So
Right.
now that I started to identify more as Bajoran once Ensign Rolarin showed up.
Right. Right.
But yeah, so it
Very
makes
good.
sense to me. So I can follow the why he's gone into their past, and it's not his planet, but yet he is starting to forget who he is and revert back to his um, nature. I can't
Right.
say human nature because he's only half human, but he's
That's right.
trying to revert back to that.
Well, just to finish up, and I've held off as long as I can during this talking about this episode, but Mariette Hartley, two
She is
words,
beautiful.
2 words, yum e.
Yeah, I
Yes.
would agree. She's just gorgeous.
So maybe that's why I gave it a better rating than
And
Candace. I
you know
don't know.
what? I mean, the outfit is absolutely ridiculous. I don't care how hot it is in this cave with the hot springs on this
Yeah.
island in the ice, this like land in the ice ages. It is not
Yeah.
that hot. She doesn't have to disrobe so much,
Right.
but she
Uh,
still looks great.
yes. Roddenberry strikes again. So that is today's special of the day, kids, and I hope you enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed it a little bit more than Candace did. Um,
Listen, I loved it. And you know what? Now I'm just like, I'm just going to rewatch all of them. And I've started with The
oh,
Trouble with Tribbles, which is my favorite episode, no matter how
is it?
cliched and ridiculous it is to say that The Trouble with Tribbles is my favorite
Okay.
episode.
Well, we're going to tackle it. Maybe if I behave myself, you'll come back and we can have that in the episode. Uh, just to wind up, uh, I just want to say just one thing that's kind of important. You will never hear any ads on this particular podcast, so you're not going to be hearing about psychological services or psychiatric services, meal kits, bras, nor will
Mattresses?
you mattresses, nor will you ever hear the word Patreon used unless it's in jest. But what I would like to ask you to do is to give us a rating on iTunes because that makes more people aware that we exist and therefore our group can grow. So, good or bad, well, you may not know, but my basic policy is if you're going to, you know, take it out on somebody, you got to be able to take it back. So bad reviews are welcome as well. Um, uh, just don't complain about Candace because she's fantastic. Complain about me. I'm not. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, that would be that would be great. Thank you very much. Now, Candace, would you like to tell everybody about your projects? And then I get to pressure you about one that's kind of gone by the wayside.
Oh,
But
I
give
know.
us the
I know.
give us the newest projects.
Sure. So I co host the Village podcast by the Bookshelf. That is a podcast all about sort of reading and movies and things. And it's, an official podcast from a small business here in Guelph, the Bookshelf. So we do that once a month, supposedly. We're going to try to get back to once a month. It's been a long, hard,
Yes, of course. Yes.
pandemic. You can also find me every 3 weeks on End Credits Radio, where I talk about a new movie and new-ish, because again, theaters and movie releases not happening quite as regularly.
No.
But so we're doing that, and then are you asking about the fate of 100% Candace?
No, I'd already put that to bed.
Yeah.
I thought you'd put it to bed, so I went along with it. No, I'm
Yeah.
talking about the fabulous CanCon
Oh, the
podcast.
Canned Con cast. Yes, I know you love that show too. So that's, it's just a thing that sometimes happens whenever we
Yeah, it
decide we
hasn't
have
happened
a
in a year and a
I
half.
know, whenever we decide we have a something to do. I will say I did propose that we try to do something around Halloween, and unfortunately timing just didn't work. And so yeah, maybe I'll try to do that a little bit. I will say, however, caveat that in my real life I am a political staffer for a provincial party, and there is an election coming up in the next 100 or so days, which is zero time in electoral um, you know, timelines. So I have a very busy next few months. So we'll
But
see.
that's a good thing because I can encourage listeners to go and listen to all of the back episodes of CanCon. You'll enjoy it. It's with Candace and our mutual MMPR buddy Anthony Marco. I disagree with most of their choices, but it's fun to listen to, and I encourage you to listen to it as well. Speaking of music, you can catch me on my other podcast where I am yet just a minion to the great poobah of the show, Jason Book from Cleveland. It is called In Your Ear Holes. We look at music, just one song at a time, good, bad, and this upcoming week, a bit of a guilty pleasure. Sometimes we throw those in. You can find that at In Your Ear Holes on Twitter and also on your favorite podcasting platforms. My name is Oliver Rockside. You can reach me if need be at Oliver Rockside on Twitter, and please remember to rate. You can put a little blurb there if you want to too, but if you can rate, that would be great. Until next time, when that very same Jason Book and Stephanie Tyler will be joining me for our next episode, episode 2, Piglet on Misogyny. It's going to be a fun one, kids. Candace, thank you so much for being my debutante for the second time.
Thank you. I feel like I'm at a ball.
Oh, fantastic. Wonderful. This podcast has now turned into a cotillion for some reason. Okie dokie, kids. Thank you, nerdos. Take care. Bye.